today's webinar, we'll be talking about data export and data feed options in Contrail. So with that, these are all options that are going to take place for the most part, really, not all options. For most of these options, this is something that will take place on the admin side in Contrail. So if you're not able to log into your own Contrail deployment and see these in the admin side, you may want to talk to your system administrator and make sure that you have the correct settings, the correct privileges associated and assigned to your account so that you are able to access these features. So in general, we've got a couple different ways of getting data outside of Contrail, and I'm going to start with the idea of just exporting data for a one-time project or for short term. What I mean by that, so let's say that you're interested in analyzing the data at a particular site over the last couple of days or over a specific period of time, but you're not looking for regular access to that feed. We've got two different ways that I'll show you to pull that data out of Contrail. So this first one is going to be probably the most basic option that we've got, and this is an option that is available to all of our Contrail clients. And this is going to also be the option that's available to the general public if your homepage and if your user admin application is open to guest users without a login. So what you can do to do this will be to choose which sensor you're going to download from, and you will download on a sensor by sensor basis, and you can download up to 1 year's worth of data with this option. And in that sense, it doesn't have to be, within the last year, but it can be a maximum of 1 year's worth of data. So what I mean by that, let's go ahead and find the sensor that we're going to download from. So I can go either to the map or to sites, and we'll go the sites option. And I can click on any of these sites here. So I'll just click the first one. And let's take a look at the stage data here. So clicking on that sensor, and I can see here, great, this is what our sensor page looks like. I'm scrolling down to the data table a little bit, and there's my download button. So perfect. I've got this range right here. This range of data that will be downloaded is reflected by what range is selected in the date range picker here. So if I want to select any data that's not the default shown, I would go in and I can choose the last 7 days, the last 30, a custom range. And again, keep in mind that that custom range does have to be within the realms of 1 year's worth of data. So let's go ahead, I'll do the last 7 days just so that we've got a little bit of variation, and scroll back on down, and I can click download, and you'll see we've got 3 different options for formats for this download. One is an Excel spreadsheet, CSV format, or tab delimited format. So I'm going to click on the CSV just for simplicity. You can see that downloaded at the bottom of my screen, and if I open that up, well, it opened up automatically in Excel because that's unfortunately what I've got as my default. But you can see here that we've got this downloaded, we've got the reading time, the receive time, the value here is the finished data value, the units, the data quality, and then the raw value. So we get a lot of good information in this basic download here. And then I'll also show you one other kind of format that's cool that we can look at. Let's go ahead and find a rain increment sensor. So I'm going to back out and go back to the sites, and let's filter for a rain increment here. We've got 2 different options. So let's do this second one. I like the looks of this one. Clicking on the sensor name takes me to the sensor, and I can scroll on down. And alrighty, so different things here. You can see that we've also got a few different options for how we are binning this. So usually here what we would see, it looks like there's been 0 rainfall for a little while. So that doesn't really help, but if I go, let's see if I could expand the range, if that brings in anything to show. Okay, there we go. We've actually got some rain to show. Excellent. So when you look at rain increment sensors from the user application side, you have the ability to change how the bins show up. Right now, we're looking at daily bins, daily intervals. So what we can do is switch that to an hourly, a 15-minute, a 5-minute, or technically a 1-minute. And keep in mind that these shorter time periods do depend on how frequently that data is being received. If you're getting 15-minute data, then we aren't going to be breaking it down into 5-minute bins because you're only getting it every 15 minutes. So keep, kind of take that with a grain of salt, what you use here. I'm going to cut that down to hourly just for a little bit more definition. So there we go. And then I can also, because I've selected those bins up here along with my date range, I have the option to download data in those bins as well. So let's take a look at what that would look like in comparison to kind of more of the event data view, which is what I had shown with that stage sensor. I'm going to open that as a CSV, open that up, and you can see here, gives me a little bit less information, but that's fine because it's all based on those bins instead. So we've got hourly data here now, the value for that hour and the units. So just another option there. So that's really our most basic option for data download. It's great if you just want a couple of sensors, a short time period, or you want the public to have general access to your data. Those are, the best cases for this kind of use case. However, I know that sometimes you're looking for many different sensors, or you're looking for a long period that's, greater than a year. You're looking for the last 5 years of data, and it can be a bit of a pain to have to go sensor by sensor, 1 year of a data at a time. And so for most of our clients in Contrail, Cloud Server, and our base station users, those of you who have it locally hosted or self-hosted, we also have an option for in Contrail analytics reports, and that will allow you to export a greater range of data. So this is where we take the cut over to the administration environment. We will now leave the user side of Contrail behind. So I'm clicking admin here. And let's switch over and look at reports. So here we have our reports list. This is showing both on-demand reports, which are those quick queries, and then this is also showing analytics reports, which are more of an engine-based search that do a lot more number crunching. So it's those analytics reports that we will be using for this kind of a thing. So I am going to, there's two different ways. From these tiles up at top, I can click on analytics, or I can also filter by type here and select analytics there. So here we are, a couple different options, and things I'm going to do is I'm just going to start filtering by export. And so if I click export, here we are, bunch of different options. Main thing that I'm going to show here is a quick step through of the export event data, but we do also have options for time series data within here. So we can do rainfall as time series data or just general sensor data, and that will work best with things like stage, air temperature. It doesn't work for every single sensor type. So if you've got questions on that, let us know and we can follow up with a little bit more information about any limitations with the export sensor time series data. But in general, we'll look at the event data right here, and we've got 3 different options that we can kind of do a filter out by. We can go by group, by system, or by view. And personally, I like by view because you get a little bit more control based on the views you already have. So let's see, here we are. Great options we see. Here is where we will select which view we want to look at. So I'm going to leave it on our default South Florida view. Then we specify the start time and the end time of the range because I don't really need a whole lot of information here. I'm just going to go back for about a day or so. Just to make sure that this doesn't take a whole lot of your time today. And that's something I do want to touch on real quick is analytics reports, depending on how much data you're looking over, they can take longer. Some reports that I've taken, I did some time series work a while back, and we were looking over 5-year increments, and that took on the scale of hours, really. So you got to be patient with analytics reports. There is a lot of kind of crunching going on in the background. But what's cool with analytics reports is you don't have to stay on that page. It's a job that will be submitted to the server, and it will kind of work away in the background. And it will also go ahead and send an email to the email address that's associated with your user account once that report is done, should you wander away from that page. So that's a kind of cool option. So you can kind of set these up in the background, go do your thing, and then come back, and then it'll be there for you. So in options, other things we can do, if I wanted to filter out by a specific site ID or a specific sensor ID within this view, I could put those in there. I can also filter out by what sensor type I want included in here. So any of the sensor types that are defined within this view will be listed here. Let's see, so do I want all of them? You know what, I'll actually go ahead and filter out just by stage in this case. So there we go with the stage. I can add a note, so I'm saying webinar. I'm very creative today. So let's go ahead and we'll click run. So this is going to kind of churn away. I'm going to leave the page up. Since I selected a very short range of data and I filtered that down to just one sensor type, that was actually relatively quickly. So I can go ahead and click the download button. So when I open this up, you'll see that's a zip file of different CSVs for each sensor and each site that's in that was contained within the filter parameters that I put in there. If I open this up, then we'll see here's what our export looks like. We've got a bit of header information indicating, what view this came out of, the period this should be over, site and sensor information, and then we've got the sensor ID that should change really throughout this whole thing. Timestamp is going to be the reading time, not the reported time, but the reading time. Then we also have a raw value, a finished value, and a data quality here. So just again, this is what we would typically recommend for those of you who are looking for longer ranges of data, a wide variety of different sensors, and don't really have the time to be clicking sensor by sensor, year by year from that user application option.
Hey, Lindsay, we have a question.
Yeah.
So we have a question regarding, is this report good for stage data, and are there specific ports that should be run for certain sensor types?
Awesome. So with that, I would say that this is something that would be great for stage data. I don't necessarily think that there's a whole lot of differentiation between reports for different sensor types, with the exception of if you're looking at time series data for rainfall. That would be the one distinguisher that we have. Otherwise, this export event data or the export time series data should be, for the most part, any of those sensors. The export time series data, like I said, that one's a little bit more limited to what we would call standard sensors. So that will be your air temperature, your wind direction. That'll be, I've got a list of them somewhere and I can pull that up and send that out afterwards if you would like. So for the most part, these reports would be good for all sensor types. So from there, I am going to take a step in the other direction now and start talking about what we should do if you're in a situation where you would like more repeated access to exporting data. So in that case, we would look at what we would call a data feed or an output system option for pulling data outside of Contrail. So we've got a couple of different options there as well. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our systems view within the admin because that's where most of this will take place. So let's go ahead, click system. It's warning me about leaving changes and that's fine. So I think in general, we've talked about systems, but just as a quick reminder, systems are the mechanism by which we pull data into Contrail or how we put data out of Contrail or pull data out of Contrail. So we like to have distinct systems for each different format of data that we're pulling in, for lack of a better word. You can see here we've got different system types listed for alert2, for CDEC, that kind of a thing. And the same goes for output systems. All of these listed here are actually input systems. So I should switch that view and let's check out the outputs here. And what we're doing with this, the first one we're going to look at is our API option. And so for that, the system type that you would want to set up is a data exchange output system. Let's go ahead and take a look at the data exchange output. So this is one that's already been pre-configured. It's the setup is fairly straightforward in this. You add the system and then you would go in and add sites and add sensors. If you want to add those sites or sensors to an existing output system, you can go up to the Edit and the drop-down menu and click on Output. It will load, and then here will be a list of all of the different sensors that you have defined within Contrail. And you can start typing to find one of those if you want. Like I can start typing out stage, and it will look at all the different stage sensors. And if there is a check by it, it is already listed in the output system. And if you want to add it to the output system, you would just check the box right next to it. And that will add it to the list of sensors that can be accessed with that output system. So I'm going to take a step back here. And so with this API, we have a document that talks about the different methods that you can use for access, but I'll show you a couple of examples of basic methods. And actually, they're really easily accessible from your own output system in that in this system type box, we have an API option also with a drop-down menu, and you'll see that there's a couple of different sample requests here. So for example, if I want to look at the latest data, I can click on that latest data, and you'll see here this is an XML output, and XML is the only file format that we have available for the API at this time. And in general, you can see, okay, we've got it broken down for each row is a different sensor, and it lists site ID, the sensor ID, the data time, the data value, the raw value, all of this different information here. And this would be, you know, the latest values for all of these different sensors contained within this output system. There's also different queries that we can look at. So that was the latest data. If we want to look at just site metadata, you can click on that site option. It passes you can see up in the URL up here, it passes get site metadata, also the system key. These are both important features, and there's other arguments you can pass through the API. And for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all of those today, just because it could be a webinar all of its own, to be honest. So just kind of going through the basics of this, but here we've got site metadata. So we're looking at all of the different sites that are contained within this output system for the API, site ID, sensor ID, no sensor ID, this is just sites, sorry. The latitude and longitude, elevation if it's in there. We also have one of those where you can get the sensor metadata, and that was where I had been going next. So again, you know, we've got the site IDs, the sensor IDs, how the names for this, the last values received, validation parameters are listed within there. So just kind of giving you more of that information about what's contained within this output system. Finally, one more option. I think this is the last hour's worth of data. Yep, again, more information about that. So this is one option. You know, this is an easy option for accessing data from Contrail, because really to pull out that you can format your URL, and that gives you that XML file to retrieve. So that's kind of a straightforward approach to pulling data out of Contrail. Another option that we do have is the put event data system, or the event data system. So let's go ahead, take a step back here, and I'll see if we've got one set up already. We may not, because it's not something that we have quite so commonly in here. So we don't right now. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to drag over this document that we have written up about this. And this is a document that's available at help.onerain.com, which is our new help platform. If you haven't been there, recommend checking it out. And so this one will tell you how to set up an output system for event data specifically. And this is a little bit more flexible in that what you can do with this would be if you wanted to FTP or SFTP data from Contrail to a server that you have set up, where you would then pull that data from that server and do what you wish with it. So this is another option that we have. This does oftentimes require a little extra help on our end. So I'm kind of just going to go briefly through it, look through different options. You can set up different things like the recurrence rate, time window, so how frequently we want this to run, and then also what columns you want to include. And so this has an option where you can throw in the different formats that will also, because this generates a file that will have which columns you select. So site ID, sensor ID, what values, the receive time, all of that. And then you can set this up to have a CSV, a tab, or a JSON format instead of having to use the XML, which is the API. So this is a different, kind of more flexible option, but ultimately this is where you would also need to have some sort of an endpoint set up. Where are you going to transfer this data from Contrail over to? So with this option, again, you may need a little extra assistance with this setup. Please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be glad to help. And then finally, another output option that we have would be the SHEF.A or SHEF.E output system. And this is what we use most frequently when we're going to set up a feed from Contrail to the National Weather Service or another organization that the Weather Service may be associated with. And so for the last part of today's webinar, what I'm going to do is walk through the actual configuration of a feed from Contrail to MADIS. MADIS is a data assimilation platform that the National Weather Service use. I don't know what the acronym exactly stands for, but this is actually our preferred option right now for getting data out to the Weather Service, because all of the local weather forecast offices have access to the MADIS database. And so we found that we have a system pretty well set up for how we send data over there. So let's go through configuring a new system from scratch, and then we'll also look at what we would do if we wanted to add in new sites to an existing system to the Weather Service. So without further ado, let's go ahead. I'll click the add button first. And actually, this technically isn't what I would consider the first step. Because if you are looking to start sending data to the Weather Service, but you haven't really had these conversations with the Weather Service, what you should do first is actually reach out to them. And what I'm going to do is transfer over another window here. So this is how would you become a provider. So here we would look to how do you have hydrometeorological data. So we would want to follow those options here. So what I would do, sorry if I just bumped the microphone. If you are ready, what you would do is email MADIS support, and their email is going to, it's going to open up an email in my email. That's great. Cool. So I don't know if you see that address here. Otherwise, you can go ahead. Wow, I am great with the windows today, man. Let's take a back button. There we are. So I'm currently at madis.nsep.noaa.gov, and I'm looking at provider resources. So under hydrological surface, which is what most of you would fall under, you can email MADIS support with the subject, would like to become a provider. And in that email, make sure you include your network name or your agency, the number of sites, and who would be the best point of contact to reach out to. And that's how you can start to get these conversations going, because a lot of the information, we need them to be aware that you're going to start sending them data before we can actually start sending them data. So that's why technically the feed that I'll set up with you guys today is going to really be non-operational, because they don't know that I'm going to be pushing data their way. So this is kind of just for demonstration purposes. So let's go ahead. And so technically reaching out to MADIS will be your first step. And then once you have those conversations started, kind of getting moving in that direction, you can go ahead and start creating that system within Contrail. So systems, we've got the add, and let's switch from the input interface, which you're probably more familiar with, and let's switch to the output. System type. For SHEF, for MADIS rather, we need to do a SHEF.E format. Unfortunately, they're not able to take SHEF.A from Contrail at this time. We just have some different parameters in there that make it a little difficult for them to decode what we're sending them. So here we want to go ahead, SHEF.E. There's a couple of different SHEF.E types, but in this case, we want to go ahead and do SHEF.E via FTP. So now we can go ahead, add a system type. Sorry, we just did the system type, add a name. So I'm just doing, let's do SHEF.E to MADIS. So I know that I can get rid of this later if I need. So we've got the name, there's a description, and then the client. Which client do you want this attributed to? And for most of you, this will be your default client, but there could be other clients as well. Attributes, your API host and port should remain the same. The time zone, this will need to be UTC here, and same with the time zone designator, leave this as Z. Now, output header here, this is something that the folks at Matus will provide to you, what you should put in here. Oftentimes, this is going to be a series of letters or numbers that will help them identify who is sending them the data. So output header will be something that will be provided to you by the folks at Matus. So I'm just going to do, for now, it would look probably fairly similar to that. And then the target host is going to be, who are you going to be pushing the data to? So in this case, we have a specific address that we point to, and that's going to be pasted over here. It's Matus, inftp.ncep.noaa.gov. And just as a heads up, we do have a what is my word, help article already written that details all of this with information about what the specific target host has to be, the target port. And so once I'm finished configuring this, I will show you where you can find this information for future reference. So we've got the target host. The target port will be the default of 21. That's a default for FTP servers. Use passive FTP should be set to true. Then the username will be something that will be provided to you by the folks at Matus, same with the password. So that's more information that you'll get from them. Then finally, the destination path will be something that we have pre-designated. I'm pasting that over here from our help article. It's LDAD AFWS _ incoming. Then as usual, you can leave the log level and the server as they are, as the defaults. And so that's really our attribute setup. So things that you would need to get from the folks at Matus would be an output header and the username and password. And so those are the big things that we at OneRun cannot provide for you, because that's something that is provided by the weather service instead. So let's go ahead, we'll click save. And it's asking me to do this. So I am just going to put in something generic right now. Oh. Great, because I can't proceed until I actually go ahead and add these in here. Wonderful, so click save, and now it creates the system. You can see it's a blank system, no sites, no sensors, and that will be what we'll go ahead and do next. One thing I am going to try to do first is turn, oh no, that was where I wanted to go. I'm going to disable this system so it doesn't actually try to push them data. So I just checked that enable box to off. You can see its system is turned off. I just don't want this in the background pushing data to somebody that's not expecting it and freaking out their system a little bit more. There's no point in doing that. So other things we can do, we want to add in sites and sensors next. So as I showed you before with adding sites and sensors to your output system for the API, it's a similar process. So we'll go up to the edit dropdown, and click output. And again, we want to check the boxes next to the data to add here. So there are a few limitations to what we can do with SHEF E. SHEF E will take like stage gauge or an elevation, gauge height. It will do a pool elevation, and then it will take a rain increment. So again, those are like a stage or a gauge height, pool elevation, and rain increment. Those are the three parameters that we can send through SHEF.E, because it sends them at specifically expected intervals, and it bins up the rainfall exactly as expected. So that's why we do those three with SHEF.E. So just as a few, let's see what we can add for along those lines. So we'll add a stage option. Check that, and you can see added sensor. Let's do a rain option. So you want to do rain increment. let's do that. And do we have pool elevation or like a reservoir elevation? We do. Cool. So we'll go ahead and add that as well. So I clicked the continue button and now you can see we got 3 different sites and 3 different sensors. So our next step with this, yep, we're not done yet, will be to update the output site IDs to use the National Weather Service IDs that are provided by the National Weather Service. So if you don't have these already, this will be another piece of information that you'll need to work with them to obtain. This will usually be a 4 or a 5 letter digit identifier that they use internally. So they don't really know what Contrail site IDs mean to them. Not really a whole lot of information for them there. So they have their own specific naming convention that you can change the output site IDs. It won't mess with your input, your data collection, any of that. This will just be how things are labeled when we send this data out. So I'll put in a couple examples here. They're not going to be, usual. So what I did is I clicked the edit button. Right now the input matches the output, but I'm going to do something kind of generic here. Again, I'm making something up as I go. In general, this is something that's going to be provided to you by the National Weather Service instead. So I've got that in there. We click save. And now you can see that instead of having kind of the blank here, that new output site ID is listed as different. That's great. We want that different tag there. If it doesn't have the output site ID and that different tag, then that data will not end up being processed by the Weather Service. So that's one of the first things I will always do when I'm troubleshooting this, is just make sure we've got all the IDs defined. So I'm going to go through and edit another one. So we've got this. And again, I am making these up as I go. These are not actual NWS LIs. That will be something that must be provided to you by the National Weather Service and not by OneRain. Then I'll show you the shortcut that I normally like to use. One thing I have been doing is just clicking the edit button next to each one. You can also click the edit button at the top of the page, which opens up the editor so that you can hit all of the IDs all at once and then click save. So there we go. Great, we've got our site IDs, our output site IDs defined here. So let's go back to that system once more. And since we've done the output site IDs, you can probably guess that our next step is to do the output sensor IDs. So we'll go ahead now, click on the sensors, and we need to define the sensor IDs for the output. Same thing goes, these are output IDs. They will not impact your data collection. Rather, they're just a different label for when we send that data out. So for these, there are specifics of what you should use for each sensor type, and that's why I picked one of each. So I'm going to use my shortcut and click the edit button all at the top here. And then I can get all of them at once. So rain increment will need to be PC. Reservoir elevation or pool height would need to be HP. And then stage needs to be HG. And so these are what we call SHEF codes. These are defined by the National Weather Service. This isn't something that OneRain devised. And so these are kind of standard across Weather Service and SHEF. And if you have had systems, you might notice that they're pretty similar there. And if you're already familiar with SHEF codes, one thing you might be asking is, well, Lindsay, rain increment is actually supposed to be PP, not PC. PC technically means rain accumulation. And this is kind of a shortcut on our end because we look for PC in this case to do some calculations on the back end. So for this particular SHEF.E system, please go ahead and use PC for rain increment, HP for reservoir elevation or pool height, and then HG for stage or gauge height along those lines. So you can go ahead, click save. And then what this will do is run at the designated intervals that are expected of SHEF.E format, and that will send those out automatically. on the back end. So this is what I would consider a fully configured system. So if we wanted to go ahead and add new sites to this now existing system, we could go up to the edit dropdown again, click on output, check whatever sites we need. So let's go ahead and add another rain gauge real quick. We'll go rain increment here. I can go down to the bottom then and click continue. So now you'll see we've got 4 sites, 4 sensors, because I just added something new. So each time you add something new, you will have to go into the sites, add in the new site ID. So we've got, the output site ID. So we'll call it KBCT1 just for something to put in there. And then you'll go back and identify that sensor type as well. It's rain, so we would want that to be PC. So that kind of concludes what I would consider the setup and addition to a feed to the National Weather Service. I know that this is a question that's come up a lot with us lately, so I hope that this kind of helps provide a little bit of background on how this is done. I did say I would show you where you can find this kind of information. So pulling over a new tab, this is at help.onerain.com. It's our Contrail help page. And if you land on the home page or any other page, you can start searching and typing things in. So the article I'm currently looking at is how do I configure a new data feed to the National Weather Service? And this covers the whole process that we just walked through. It contains information like the target host, which I just had put in there, as well as the destination path. I didn't make those pieces up. I don't have those memorized. So I refer to this article myself pretty frequently. And also within here is if I wanted to find information on how to add sites to an existing feed. Let's say I start typing existing. If I could spell it right, that would even make it easier. Existing. Well, maybe that's not my best search term, huh? So let's look at, just look for an NWS, right? And so if I hit enter, we've got, oh, there we go. Existing was there. How do I add sites and sensors to an existing feed to the National Weather Service, as well as how do I configure a new data feed? So this is what I would consider the best resource to find all of this information again, just for your future reference. So with that, that does conclude what I was planning on talking about today. I hope that you found some of this useful. I will go ahead next and unmute our participants. If you would like to speak, you will have to confirm that you would like to be unmuted on your end. If I hit the unmute button on my end, it won't just automatically let us hear what you're saying. So no worries there, you still do have your privacy in that sense. But thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. One quick thing is I would like to plug I would like to
plug that, Lindsay. So
awesome.
next Wednesday, June 24th, we're going to be doing a special webinar series on flood warning system telemetry. It's going to be a joint webinar with High Sierra, One Rain, and FTS. High Sierra and FTS being sister companies of One Rain. We're going to be discussing different telemetry options. I know a lot of people on this call obviously already have some sort of telemetry option defined, but they're going to really cover all of the options that are available for flood warning systems and get into some alternate options, some options that may help out in different scenarios. So feel free to join. That's next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up at hsierra.com, click support, and then live webinars. You'll see the sign up there. Feel free to reach out to us if you want some more information on that. We'd be happy to provide that. I'm not showing any questions in our questions box, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. If not, thanks for joining us.